Welcome to the Celebrity Estates Wills of the Rich and Famous podcast. In this podcast, we break down high-profile celebrity estate planning cases for advisors and their clients. Most celebrity estate catastrophes are based on the same issues that everyday people face, just with the volume turned up. Our goal is to identify and extract the individual estate planning issues that lie at the heart of each story. We then discuss what advisors should expect and how to avoid common pitfalls. Hosted by wealthmanagement.com senior editor David Lenok.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of wealthmanagement.com's Celebrity Estates, Wills of the Rich and Famous. For anyone new to the podcast, in each installment, myself and a guest take on a different celebrity estate and attempt to extract some key lessons that planners can apply to their more traditional clients. The idea being that celebrity estate planning stories, although often ridiculous in their details, generally have at their cores very basic issues that can just as easily apply to non-famous or fabulously wealthy clients. Our guest this week is Tim Volk. He's the architect of a highly successful entrepreneurial career that encompasses independent advisory, strategic planning, and financial services. As founder and principal of Volk and Company, a boutique advisory firm that specializes in assisting closely held businesses, family offices, both single and multifamily, and family-controlled enterprises, he leverages his own experience in a successful legacy family business and provides prudent and trusted counsel to families striving to protect their enterprises and preserve their wealth. Thanks so much for joining us today, Tim.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
The subject of today's episode is a fun one: legendary frontman Freddie Mercury. Born Farouk Bulsara, Mercury was a British singer and songwriter who achieved worldwide fame as the lead vocalist of the rock band Queen. Because of his flamboyant stage persona, to say the least, Mercury's sexuality became a fairly common topic of discussion in the media during his life, and it was one that he generally played coy with. For instance, in December of 1974, when asked directly, "So how about being bent?" which doesn't really get much more direct than that, by the New Musical Express, Mercury replied, "You're a crafty cow. Let me put it this way. There were times when I was young and green. It's a thing schoolboys go through. I've had my share of schoolboy pranks. I'm not going to elaborate further." It's important to note the timing here, as homosexual acts between adult males over 21 had only recently been decriminalized in the UK in 1967, so it's only about 7 years earlier. Indeed, even through the 80s, Mercury often still kept the distance from his partner while in public. His personal life was, of course, much more complex than that, as it usually is. In the early 1970s, Mercury began a long-term relationship with Mary Austin, who he met through guitarist Brian May. Though the two would go on to have numerous separate romantic entanglements, they remained inseparable through the years. Mercury often referred to her as his only true friend. In a 1985 interview, he said of Austin, "All my lovers asked me why they couldn't replace Mary, but it's simply impossible. The only friend I've got is Mary, and I don't want anyone else. To me, she was my common-law wife. To me, it was a marriage. We believe in each other. That's enough for me." In 1985, he began a long-term relationship with hairdresser Jim Hutton, whom he also referred to as his husband. Mercury was diagnosed with AIDS in 1987. Hutton, who himself tested HIV positive in 1990, lived with Mercury for the last 7 years of his life, nursed him during his illness, and was present at his bedside when he died. Mercury wore a gold wedding band given to him by Hutton in 1986 until the end of his life. He was cremated with it on. Mercury publicly announced his diagnosis the day before his death from complications from the disease in 1991 at the age of 45. Mercury spent or donated to charity much of his wealth during his lifetime, with his estate valued at around £8 million at the time of his death. He bequeathed his home, Garden Lodge, and the adjoining mews, as well as 50% of all privately owned shares, to Mary Austin. His sister, Kashmira Cook, received 25%, as did his parents. He notably also willed £500,000 to Jim Hutton. Unfortunately, Hutton had to use much of that money to relocate. Because Mercury had left his home, Garden Lodge, to Austin, she moved in and took over, giving Hutton about 3 months to clear out and find a new residence. As the first major rock star to die of AIDS, Mercury's death represented a landmark event in the history of the disease. In April of '92, the remaining members of Queen founded the Mercury Phoenix Trust and organized the Freddie Mercury tribute concert for AIDS awareness to raise money for AIDS research. The Mercury Phoenix Trust has since raised millions of pounds for various AIDS charities. The tribute concert, which took place at London's Wembley Stadium in front of a live crowd of 72,000, had an estimated international viewing audience of over 1 billion people. Mercury's sexuality, for good or ill, is one of the first things that comes up when his name is invoked. Though it doesn't necessarily seem correct to call Mercury closeted since he shared his truth with those close to him, he nonetheless felt compelled to keep it a secret to the world at large. Though we live in a more tolerant time, scare quotes there, Many LGBTQ clients find themselves in similar positions as Mercury, both in terms of their sexuality and the non-traditional family structures that they set up. Tim, what are some of the best practices to consider when advising LGBTQ plus clients, particularly those who are closeted or only out to a select few?
It's a great question, David, because I think it's surprising the number of people who may not live openly as to their status, whether they're gay or lesbian or as such. And I find it interesting that so many celebrities have really faced that challenge in their career, right? Because of the potential backlash that they may get from being openly gay or openly lesbian. And I think one of the challenges that you have as an advisor is to be able to step in, be able to gain that confidence with the client and that intimacy with the client where they're able to share some of these very, very important yet and intimate details of their life, yet they're very worried about how that may be perceived as others. We also see this with executives in large public companies who also keep their sexuality pretty close to the vest. I think that there's been probably more in recent years, but even today, some of my brethren who are advisors to families, to clients, have frequently said that many of their clients are still not out with regard to the public. And so it's difficult as an advisor to sort of, especially if you're new to the relationship, as to sort of navigate those waters. It's a challenge, right? Because if I'm going to give you quality advice, I really have to understand the nuance around your life to be able to then plan for what we need to plan for.
Mm-hmm. In a recent article that you wrote for Trust and Estates magazine, you compared, I guess, sort of, the normal world, or normal is a terrible way to put it, I guess, the traditional world to the sort of LGBTQ world, and sort of, I guess, as a clash of cultures almost, as any other sort of a New Yorker going to Oklahoma would perhaps have to adjust their behavior lest they inadvertently insult somebody from a different culture. And it's the same sort of deal when you're dealing with an LGBTQ plus person, or even within that designation, different types of people. And advisors really can play an important role in sort of bridging the gap between these cultures.
Oh, critical. And in some cases, I think the advisors play a can bridge the gap. Is that and the ability to help the clients and help the family that you're working with. In many cases, not everyone in the family may be aware of this or have it openly discussed. Mm-hmm. And therefore, I think that, I have a belief that it was, and I think I referenced it in my paper, was that I had great advice from an older gay gentleman that when I came out to the family, and I was really outed by my little sister, who overheard a conversation on a phone that I had with my now husband, but at the time boyfriend, and I was not out to anybody, and she overheard it, and it caused my dad to confront me on it. And there's a lot of anxiety that happens when that happens. And he just said to me, give everyone some time to process this new piece of information or disclosure, and then people have to think about coming to terms with it. For the person who's coming out, you've dealt with this for most of your life, or for a long time, let's say, whether you've openly thought about discussing it, there's been an internal conflict. And yet, if you're my brother and I come out to you and you had no clue, it's the first time you've heard it, you've got to have time to process it. I mean, you just need to have some time to think about it. And unfortunately, I know you've probably never seen this in your law practice, but some people say things at the moment that they really regret having said, right? Mm. And so therefore, I just say to everybody, let everybody process. Even if the things are said that aren't pleasant, try to let that be, you know, water on the duck's back. Let it just try to roll off, because it doesn't necessarily mean that they meant it in the way that it was said. There are cases where it is. I mean, we know a lot of people that are disenfranchised from their families because the family has some belief that they just, you know, have disowned that member of the family, which is, as I referenced in the paper, causes, you know, some of the largest, I think the second most death is caused by suicide with young people between the ages 10 and 24 is because they're gay. So we also see a large number of homeless youth that are gay. The preponderance of homeless youth are gay. And, you know, if they're on that path, it just creates a whole nother problem. So even if you come from a wealthy family and you're ostracized, you may have a very different life ahead of you. So the advisor, if they're equipped correctly, may be able to bridge that, may be able to moderate that within the family. It may be able to get people to have a more reasonable voice.
Yeah, and that's on both sides, right? I mean,
Both sides.
to moderate
Both
everyone.
sides. Mhm.
Because as you mentioned, I mean, you know, people who are finding out about the coming out can have, you know, very out of character reactions in the moment, and can even maintain it for, you know, a period of time, if not forever, unfortunately. But the advisor can play the role in sort of helping with the, you know, planning around that. Like, oh, okay, you know, this person, maybe my feelings on this person have now changed for good, but also in sort of tempering that and says, okay, well, you know, they give them a moment, like you said, like your friend told you, okay, don't cut them out of your will just yet. Don't change all your plans because of, you know, this has been a rough 2 weeks or whatever. Because, you know, give that, you know, appreciate for them that there's time to do that. And then it's the same for a client who, you know, my child has come out, I'm very religious, I'm going to freak out and, you know, cut them out of my will. It's like, well, don't do that yet. You know, this is, you know, the advisor can play an important role, as you've mentioned, in sort of being, you know, the voice of reason, I guess, for lack of a better term, when you sort of have clashes between cultures like this. But as the advisor, you know, we're talking about how difficult it is and traumatic it can be to be outed and to come out. Obviously, that presents a very difficult. We're saying, oh, well, the advisor can just help. That also is a very difficult test for the advisor to even himself find out about. Right? The last thing you want to do is insult a client or accidentally, God forbid, accidentally out them. So, as an advisor, how do you even go about? You know, your clients are unlikely to closeted clients unlikely to march in and just announce to their advisor that they're gay if they're not telling their family. So what are some of the steps, you know, what can an advisor do to try to like work into that area of trust that they suspect that perhaps a client is gay or living an LGBTQ lifestyle, that they, you know, can work their way in and show that they're trusted, that they can be trusted and that they're not going to, you know, out them to their family or that they can actually offer, you know, even if they themselves are not of that same culture, can offer relevant advice still in your regards to it.
It's a very interesting question of perspective, because I think what brings to mind is that there are all levels of situations that I think the advisors may face. It may be that you have a older married couple and one of the spouses has decided to come out as gay and they have kids and grandkids. And it may be a process for them to sort of figure out and navigate how they want to preserve their estate and take care of the people around them. There may be a very amicable, open discussion, and then people are accepting. That is not always the case, as you can imagine. There are situations where there become a lot of hostilities. There are serious legal situations where people have decided to try and withhold access to the kids or grandkids. They've sued. There can be some pretty extreme situations. It's not just the younger rising generation that we see coming to terms with it. So it's always interesting to see what the basis of that client is coming to you for. If it's a new client and they have hinted that there's a problem, it may be as simple as you asking a series of questions for them. And I outlined some of these questions in the article I wrote. And one of them is just to be respectful and say, do you feel comfortable if I ask you a few more? And these will be probing questions. And you need to trust that this space that we're in is a confidential space. and that I will keep your confidence. So I think that helps. You have to create a safe space for this client, regardless, right?
Yeah, these aren't the sort of questions that you just hand them printed out on a form to fill out.
No, because I think it misses the whole nuance. I think that one of the benefits to having a high emotional quotient is your ability to reason and get people to understand that you're there with them. There's an empathy that people will sense from you. That empathetic part of you is what's going to help them get through this. I think if you're trying to be clinical and analytic, it's going to be more challenging for you to win their trust. And I think we see a lot of people in the industry who sort of placate that, like, oh yeah, I love the gays. Like, oh my God. And then like, Tim, oh, we have like a lady at the gym one day said, she was so cute. She's an older woman. She has lots of issues with her physical being. And she tapped I was working out in the middle of my lifting, and she came over and said, you need to work on that stomach. Nobody likes that. And I went over afterwards and I'm like, Mary, don't you know you can't call a gay man fat at 6 o'clock in the morning? And she says to me, oh my God, you're gay? I didn't know that. My son's gay. His name is Rick. He lives in New York. Maybe you know him. I'm like, okay.
It's part of the network.
It's like for the movie, I think Still Magnolias, I said all gay men are named Rick, Mark, or Steve, and all gay men have track lighting. And so there's this perception of things sometimes where we just make these assumptions, right? And yet in the real world, you may not be able to tell this person is gay, LGBTQ. You may just not. I mean, and they may be really seeking counsel on what to do, and they're very worried, particularly if there's a lot of money involved or a business involved, that their inheritance, there's a lot of potential shame that they feel with it. Mm-hmm. So your ability to be empathetic and sort of talk with them, I think, becomes very helpful and a powerful basis to be able to move forward with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then some consideration has to go that to the point that this person not appearing outwardly to be sort of stereotypically of a certain community, that could be carefully curated to be that way. Mm-hmm. There's maybe they just because this is someone who may have sort of grown up with the infamous kind of gay voice, but has taught themselves to speak differently because it was a actual danger to them, and so those are barriers that the advisor needs to be willing to break down, and that takes a certain degree of being willing to be open and to engage uncomfortable topics.
It's helpful for, I think, the advisor to have some awareness. I think a lot of times there's a misunderstanding to it that you may think that you are comfortable and well-versed in it, but you may start down a topic and easily offend somebody just from a comment, because depending on that person's situation, whether they're gay or lesbian, male or female, may just be that difference in how you talk to them. And the sense of this, and I mean, from my own perspective, and I'm from Wyoming, I grew up in a really hyper masculine environment, right? And the idea that you'd have this conversation just would freak me out many years ago, because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. And as a matter of fact, I think that it was harder for me to be around some of the people I knew were gay because I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say because I want to say I'm gay. I am one. So one of the challenges with that sort of psychological place that you're at is that when you're coming to talk to someone in that place, it may be that you need to further understand more of their surroundings and what they grew up in. It's helpful to know more about the person. It gives you an opportunity to connect with them, right? Mm-hmm. Not go just for the legal piece, but tell me a little about your life. Tell me a little bit about what you like, what you do, how do you have fun? I think that might be another way to enter that zone of comfort and trust, to be able to then say, do you know that if you have needs or that would be different than maybe one of my traditional clients. And an example may be that a good example is a friend of mine whose practice is targeted to the gay community in the legal world, had a young lesbian couple come to see him, and they wanted to get married. And they were really struggling with the fact that the family had sort of forced upon a prenup. And the girlfriend, who had come from money, had never really told her new bride-to-be that she came from money. So it was a shock to both parties, right? So she brought the prenup to this friend of mine, this advisor, to go through it. Of course, he was not happy because the prenup did not follow the normal course of a prenup, which is you must disclose the assets that are available, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they assumed that there, in this document, that there was something like a $30 million or $40 million available. And what they come to find out after the attorney stepped in and started to reach out to the family and the family's attorneys, who were really bullying their client's daughter, right? That there's 10 times that amount of money in her trust. So here you have, when he had to tell her that, she felt, so the family had not really fully disclosed to her the level of wealth. She had not disclosed to her potential spouse any of this. And then here you are as the attorney trying to say they're not treating you fairly in dealing with this prenup anyway. So how do you think that winds up feeling for the heir to this family?
It's so many secrets all coming out at once. It's overwhelming.
It's overwhelming. So here you have both, everybody that's involved is overwhelmed. Even the parents who were directing this prenup, who probably had good intention, right? Like most parents, there's probably good intention. And that just, I want to protect my child and I want to protect the money. But there are many better ways that this could have been handled to better, for a better outcome of everybody involved. One, they should have been having a conversation with their daughter about the level of wealth from the beginning. Two, there should have been an understanding and expectation of what the family wanted her to be able to do or not do with this money. And three, I don't know that the family meant to say they don't like this potential spouse, but certainly it's put everybody on opposite ends of the spectrum it's going to be a combative relationship at best right now. And then you've also fueled a potential conflict between the two parties, which is the inheritor and the inheritor's new spouse. I know that's not a new thing, right? That happens in both the gay and straight world. But it's certainly when the attorneys didn't fully disclose or follow the law, it made it feel like the family was trying to circumvent that and also cut their inheritance short, or just wasn't maybe being honest with everybody the way they should have been.
Mm-hmm. I think that really reinforces the need to have these sorts of conversations and interactions in person as well. Because I can, just speaking as a straight person who considers himself an ally and generally considers himself fairly comfortable with speaking about these topics. Mm-hmm. Yet every time I get on a podcast like this, I'm amazed at how much trouble I have speaking about these topics. And even within this podcast, I'm sure I've insulted a ton of people inadvertently. I mean, I referred to the gay world as the normal world earlier, and I'm mortified about that. But clearly, not what I meant. And I think, just to bring that out of myself a little bit, is that for advisors who want to be allies, it's important not to let perfect become the enemy of good. Where you're too scared to engage in these topics because you may not have the exact correct words. It's important if you're in person and they can see, even if you're not using the exact correct nomenclature and right words, people can see your sincerity and they can see what you're going for. And that often enough is enough to diffuse that situation. And it's better to bring it up imperfectly than to just let it sit there and not bring it up at all because you're scared of misspeaking.
That's right. In the case of the the ultra high net worth market or the family office market. And to close the loop on that last story, they went ahead and got married without the prenup.
Yeah.
Interesting, right?
Well, I mean, I think those sorts of things, it's in a vacuum, it's so easy to think about how important it is and how much financial sense it makes and all these things. But once you're faced with the actual human element of what this plan that makes perfect financial sense is doing to the actual people it's affecting, well, then, it changes everything.
Totally. And if we play forward that, I mean, if you can start the conversation, then you can start to have a more deep understanding of how do you identify. Do you consider yourself out? If not, how do you identify to others? Are you out maybe to the close, the people that are close to you? Do you have a relationship? Is that relationship exclusive? Do you have a polyamorous relationship? I always am surprised at that myself. Are you legally married? If so, where did you get married? Did you, it's interesting because the irony is that gay marriage was legalized in 2015, but many of us had been together for many years prior to that. So it was sort of it was exciting, but it also isn't like a normal courtship, right? Where you've got the dating and then this excitement to get married and then you get married and you start your life together. In this case, you kind of met in courtship, you started your life together. No, P.S. We're going to go get married now.
There's definitely, I know some people who've actually, found it almost insulting to imply that they get married because it's like, we've been together 40 years. We're married already. I don't need your, ceremony or your legal okay to tell me what my relationship status is.
That's right.
And that can be a very difficult sort of, thing to work around. And a lot of people who sort of have the ability to be married, straight people, take that for granted and they don't realize, how like, oh, it's great, you should just do it. It's like, well, listen, like relationships are very complicated.
We've had scenarios where even though they got, the benefit to being married, I think it's 1,011 or 1,041 benefits to being married legally, right? So much of the process is about you being able to make decisions on behalf of your other half, which would be most of the time, most people would think in a husband and wife traditional marriage situation that the husband and wife would be able to make medical decisions on behalf of the other person. With gay marriage and you're married, you're able to do that. But many times beyond that, we would do all of the legal documents to give them medical power of attorney, give general power of attorney, to give durable power of attorney. We would do things to try and provide that access. And I'm hearing today that many people are going back and executing those documents, even though they're married, because they're worried in some states they're not going to recognize the marriage. And we're worried about where this is going with the new Dobbs outcome. So, I think we're facing some new times where I think this whole ability to be an advisor to the LGBTQ community is going to be more difficult. I don't think this is over yet, in other words.
Yeah. I think something that really is interestingly illustrated by sort of, this long list of questions that you just ran down, which by the way is like only half of the questions that you propose in the article, is that it has to hammer home the point that, you brought up jokingly the idea, I love the gays. And there is obviously no the gays. I mean, we're talking about the LGBTQ community sort of as a whole in this podcast, because that's just sort of the conceit that we have to make, right? To actually making this conversation manageable in a 30-minute bite. But the point of these questions, and the takeaway from these questions, is that the LGBTQ community is very much not a monolith. And even within that, obviously each person, is individual. So, you can have a certain number of, you can't really just have like, this is my gay playbook. At a certain point, you have to, like, once you get past these introductory questions, you have to start accepting that, well, this part of this community it doesn't react the same way to XYZ as this other part of the community. This part of the community may not like the other part of the community. And those are things where you can fall afoul of them, and it has to become a much more identified, much more specific sort of conversation, that it can't just be like, here's my, I'll run the gay playbook for this client.
Right. The diversity within the gay community, and I say gay community meaning all encompassing of the LGBTQ plus, is that it's a diverse community, and we're trying to put a lot of souls under one tent. And I think that we have to recognize that there's a lot of diversity and nuance to be in that tent, depending on who you're talking to. I think sometimes we tend to focus on the negative, and we try to speak to that to make sure people are aware and to try and help make it better. I do want to convey that things do get better over time in my situation, a lot of the time. Not all of it, but in our family, it's amazing to me how many I'll call champions of the gay community we have. And it is just so wonderful to watch how this process is, families, cousins, uncles, aunts, people that may not have been as vocal supporting me at the time growing up are now much more supportive, because there are children, grandchildren, even potentially great-grandchildren. And I think that changes everybody's perspective over time.
Yeah, and I mean, that's where, the coming out becomes so important, right? So that's why, to bring us back to the start of this conversation, is that the most effective way to change people's minds or to make them realize that they're being hurtful or being insensitive is by making it hit them close to home. Right? So it's like, oh, well, this is, because statistically, everyone's got some number of LGBTQ plus people in their family, probably more than you would think. And so once, helping them to realize that, and not thinking that this is not sort of like a liberal Northeast thing, or, these are these, these strange people who I can identify, I know what they look like, and I can identify them, and they live these crazy lifestyles, and they're going to ruin stuff. It's just like, well, no, this could also just be your son that you love very much, who you've passed all your values onto, and who's exactly like you, except for this one other detail. And it's expressing that to people, and that's why I guess the coming out process is so important, and so important that it be handled with care, because it is sort of the most direct way to change hearts and minds in a lot of cases.
Exactly. And I think it's critical that we build, I'll call them champions like yourself. Our straight allies are really important in helping to make acceptance a broader part of our life. And it's interesting, we lead the world, good, bad, right? We lead the world in LGBTQ plus rights, and we're here, and so we see the fight. But imagine if we were in a foreign country, and especially one where there's a lot of oppression to that, and in many cases it's illegal to be gay. So we have to appreciate the good things that and the strides we've made. I think the larger part of our population is accepting a gay marriage. I'm convinced that within the transgender community, that it is one of the more challenging parts for not only the straight community, but even for the gay community to embrace and understand. And so I think that's another level of additional level of nuance and understanding that's required. And I'm not sure that everybody's equipped to be able to do that. In some cases, you may have to find an expert in that area to help.
And that's an important realization to make too, right? That if you're not comfortable, or if you're not an expert in an area, the courage to say, I don't know, but also to say, I don't know, and not, I'm just going to avoid it because I don't know. I don't know, but I'm going to do something about it to help this person still. Right. It's a subtle but important difference.
The key here is if there's a life at risk and you have the ability to impact to save that life, I think we never know what that life will go on to do.
Yeah, and I know it sounds a bit hyperbolic to talk about that, as nominally we're speaking about financial advisors here, but it really is true, and the stakes are actually very high beyond dollars and cents.
Yeah, and they may be the only advisor people talk to. This may be the one time where they have to bring it forward, because I think people are more likely to talk about sex than they are money. When it comes to their money, it's a very tight conversation. And so much of this can be, you could be opening a much bigger conversation than you're prepared to as an advisor, right?
Absolutely. And just to sort of, as we're running out of time here, just to sort of close things up, we've been tackling just an enormous topic here that we're just not equipped really to really do justice to in 30, 35 minutes. But if we can just continue to be reckless with it and try to narrow things down even further, I mean, if there was just one piece of advice that you could give to advisors who suspect that they maybe have gay clients and they're a little afraid to actually get their hands in there and reach out, what would that piece of advice be?
Take a deep breath, be kind in your questions and conversation, and know that there are a lot of other experts around you that you can reach out to for help.
Absolutely. Great answer. Tim, I'd like to thank you for being a fantastic guest today and for really tackling an enormous and difficult topic with us.
My pleasure. It's been a true honor to be here, and thank you for the courage to talk about this.
And for all our listeners, I'll see you, or I guess you'll hear me, on the next episodes of Celebrity Estates, Wills of the Rich and Famous.
Thank you for listening to the Celebrity Estates Wills of the Rich and Famous podcast. Click the subscribe button below to become notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of InformaWealthManagement.com. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.